Welcome to this additional exercise following on from the 2-day VBA course. Now, if you attended that, you would have been provided with a folder that contained some images in, and the folder was called Hangman. If we take a look at that right now, you'll see that we have various pictures. Now, as this exercise progresses, we're going to learn about the loops, the input boxes, the message boxes, variables, and a whole host of common functions and commands that are used in most VBA application. And while we're learning, we'll have a bit of fun creating a Hangman game. If you've never come across that game before, it's where a word is hidden and you have to guess what the word is by selecting letters of the alphabet, and if you get it wrong, it draws the hangman image. Now, if you look at the pictures you've been provided with, a couple of things to note is, first of all, the location for this is, if I click up here, I've put mine on the C drive, but yours might be on the desktop. That just means you've got a longer path, but here we got the C:\/ is the name of the folder. And pay attention to the names of the images. You'll notice that they're all JPEG pictures, and you'll notice too that the name of the image is called image. However, each one has a different extension. We have image 1, image 2, image 3, 4, 5, etc. Now we know where they are. We're going to need those later on in the exercise. So let's get into the program itself. Excel. If you haven't already done so, open up Excel and open up a new book. Now, we're building a Hangman game. Now, the first thing we need to do is to type in the words that we want the Hangman game to use. Now, there's one thing to be aware of here. As we develop this, we're going to start an easy program route and then build upon it. And this is a common practice. So the first thing we're going to do is to build a list that we're going to use for the hidden words. We start off in cell A3, and if you can type in lemon, grape, melon, prune and peach. So we now have a list of words that the program is going to refer to. Now, we want to be able to add to this over time for a bigger array of words, but for now we'll have just these 5. Now, there's a thing to note about this, and we've deliberately done this to keep our programming simple to begin with. Each word only contains 5 letters, and each one of them contains the letter E, and that allows us to test our program and know that we'll always find a particular letter, because we know that the letter E is in all of them, so it doesn't matter which word it chooses. We'll also notice that there's no replication of any character in a word. So for example, we're not using a fruit of apple because it's got 2 P's in it. So for the moment, we're only keeping to words that have a single character that's not repeated. Right, moving on to the code. Let's open up the code window. So we can do this via Alt F11, and that brings up the VB editor. And in here, you'll notice down the side we've got our project window and our properties window. We don't have any module at the moment, so we're going to create a new blank module. So if we right click in the project and choose insert module, this gives us a brand new module. or sheet of paper to type our code on. Now in the course we talked about option explicit being put on automatically. If you haven't got that, then type that in. But the option explicit means that we have to declare all variables. So when we want to use a variable, we have to tell the program about it in advance and tell it what we intend to hold in that. Again, all of this was covered on the 2-day course. So we want to first of all eliminate the need for having to worry about the case of what people type. So if somebody types a small letter G, we may have a problem in it detecting that we have the word grape because it's got a capital G. Now because we don't know how people are going to type the letter, upper or lowercase, what we can include at the top here is the word option compare text. This will avoid any case issue in terms of upper or lowercase. We then want to declare some variables. Now at the moment some of these may not be apparent as to why we're doing these, but let's start off basic. We want to have 4 of these to begin with. So we're going to do this in our routine, because although we could declare these here in our declaration area, that means that they will take up computer resources all the time. We only want certain variables as and when the program runs, so we'll include these inside a routine. So let's type sub Hangman Game. We can then begin to declare. This will be dim hidden word as string. So we're going to use this variable to store the word that the computer is going to randomly pick as its hidden word. We declare another one called random number as integer. This one is going to hold a number. We're going to use the program to pick a random number, and using that random number we'll pick out the random word in the list. We declare another one which is called letter position as integer. Now this one is going to hold a number that tells us where a particular character is. So if somebody chooses the letter E and the word is lemon, then it will store the number 2 in here because it's storing the position of their chosen letter. And the final one, dim letter guess as string. Now this one is going to hold the letter that they type in that they want to find in the hidden word. So we're going to add to this list of variables as we go, but for now that will do. We then want to first of all pick up the random number. Now we can do this using the worksheet function. In other words, we're going to use an Excel function word called rand between. If you've never come across this before, this is a standard function word built into Excel, and it's called rand between. And you choose any number, a start number and an end number. That's all, just a start and an end number. So if we said 1 to 10, then it will pick a random number between 1 and 10. Now in VBA we can use some of the function words that are available in Excel by using the worksheet function command. So what we'll do, we'll say random number variable, we want that to equal worksheet function dot rand between, it should come up in the menu, open bracket. Now the arguments, well, we want the start number. Well, we're going to start at number 3. Why are we starting there? Because if you look at where our first word begins, it begins in the 3rd row in A3. So we're going to start the randomization from number 3, comma, but then we need the end one. So for the end one, we're going to use the range, and we want it to be A3 dot current region dot rows dot count plus 2. Close the bracket. So if we look at this, and we can remove our 2 panels, or before we remove these, project window, let's just rename this module, and this can be called game. So we've renamed the module. We can close down these 2 panels to give us a little bit more space so you can see what I'm typing. So if we have a look here, you can see what we have, the rand between. Now if we read this backwards, on the course I talk about reading your lines of code backwards often makes more sense. So here it says count the rows in the current region. Now what's going to be happening here, if we come over here, it selects A3. Current region is the equivalent of you doing Control A on the keyboard. It will select the array of words. Now by using current region, that means that if we add extra words, it will include those automatically. So that's the good point on that. Why did we add 2 to the end of that line? Because it starts further down. We've got to include the 2 blank cells here. Okay, so that's why we've added 2. So it's going to pick up, in this case, 5 and add 2, which will give it 7. So in effect, this command here loads into the random number a number between 3 and 7. So that's sorted out the random number. We now need a computer to use that random number to pick a word to store in the hidden word variable, and we say hidden word equals cells random number comma 1. Now cells, we have 2 attributes in the bracket, the row and the column number. Well, the column is going to be the first column, A column, so we can put that as a static 1. In the random number, whatever number was loaded into this variable is used as the row number. So if it's got a number between 3 and 7, it gives us 5. We know that the word is going to be melon stored in there. Now we need a letter that the user wants to guess is in the hidden word. So we're going to use the variable letter guess to store it, equals, now we have the input box, and we put the prompt in. So we just put type a letter and press enter. So we give them the full instructions of what to do. Once it knows what letter they want, we now need to find it. Now we're going to store its position in the letter position variable. The letter position variable equals, and we're going to use a command called inString. So inString is written like this, abbreviated, open bracket. Now it's asking, where do you want to start? Now the start will be from the first letter of the hidden word, so you can specify where it starts looking. It looks from left to right. Okay, so it's going to start on the first letter. So the first string 1 argument is the text you want to check. Now for us, that's going to be our hidden word. So we're typing hidden word, comma. The second string argument is what text or letter do you want to find in that hidden word. Now again, for us, that's going to be the letter guess that someone's guessed. We can close the bracket, and so far this is what we've got in terms of variables. We've loaded up all 4 variables with information, and we need this for the program later on. Now we can move on and start to put in some arguments as to what we want it to do when it finds a letter or not. So we're going to use an if statement here, and we're going to say if letter position is greater than 0, then. Now here you can see that when I pressed enter, the word letter position did not capitalize to match how I originally typed this in. Hence the reason why on the course we're taught to always include some form of capitalization when you're doing variables, and this is why, because it checks your own spelling. So as I've entered that, it hasn't changed, and that rings alarm bells to me that there must be a problem, and when I look closely I can see that I've misspelt it. So if I correct the spelling of that, you can now see when I move away it capitalizes that. So that's the first line of the if statement, if it's greater than 0. If it is, then of course it has found that letter, because it will be a position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can then put a message box, and just for argument's sake we will put what the hidden word is. I know it's cheating, but it'll help us while we're developing. This line, by the way, we will remove as we progress. For the moment it's helping us to see what's in the program as we run it. So the hidden word, we can then use the concatenate to join onto that a new line, and this command is VB new line. That will start a new line in the message box, and we can concatenate that with the actual letter position. So now if we enter that, you can see VB new line has capitalized to tell us that it's a recognizable command, and that's whenever you want to start a new line. It does a line feed. If you are going to use the concatenate command, it is the same as you would in Excel sheet, but note that you must have a space either side. Unlike in Excel, when you use this in formulas, you can just use the ampersand joined up with things around it. In VBA it needs to be standalone. So that's the first part, but we then want to say else. So if it's anything other than greater than 0? Well, it can only be 0, so we don't need to ask a question. We can just say, if it's anything else, then display a message box with the hidden word, and we'll join that onto a VB new line space, join it onto some text, the letter not found, to that. And because we're doing an if statement across multiple lines, we call that an if block, so we need to end it with end if. If you do an if statement with just one action, you can do that on one line. You don't need the end if, only if it's in a block. Now at this point we can begin to test our routine, and we can do this by clicking our mouse anywhere inside the subroutine and then pressing the F5 key on your keyboard, so the function 5 key. Now if you're on a laptop, you may have to press the FN key as well. Some laptops don't allow you to access the F keys along the top of the keyboard on their own. So on a regular keyboard, if I hit F5, we can see the program runs. We get the box come up. Now the computer at this point has already chosen one of those words in our list. Now I'm going to type in the letter E because I know that all 5 words do have the letter E. So if we type the letter E and enter, the word it's picked is melon, and it's correctly found the position of the letter E is position number 2. If we run this again, so if we hit the F5 again to run it, let's pick a letter that's definitely not there. If I put the letter X, which I know it won't find, it tells me the word was grape, so the randomness is working and that the letter wasn't found. So at this point we know that the code works. So continuing on with the code, we need to make a few alterations and some additional variables. So if we go back to the top, we want to have a couple of extra variables because we need the game to be able to loop, but also know when to stop. Now we're going to use what we call a do loop. So we're going to require a couple of variables. The first one, dim game loop as integer, and dim counter as integer. Now you'll notice a lot of our variables are declared as integer, and that's because we know that the number is going to be less than 32,000 and a whole number, so that's why we're setting it up to that. So they're the 2 new items we want there. The next thing we want is to be able to put the letters onto the screen so people can see the position of the word that they've guessed, and also the loop, so the game, if they get a letter wrong, it allows them to input another letter. Now the loop has to include the input box because we do want them to be able to enter another letter in. So the loop has got to start here. Let's just tidy this code up a little bit. So we'll put the do until counter equals 5. Now the reason we're putting equals 5 because there's 5 letters in each word. Again, we'll have to alter that when we add words that are longer, but for the moment all of our words contain 5 characters. So do until counter equals 5. So we know that's the start. The end of it is going to be after the if statement, and we just use the word loop. So we've now got this loop that's going to happen 5 times. It's going to go round. Now, one thing we do want is to be able to have the letters appear on the screen capitalized. So that's a key thing that we want. And as I said, we do want each letter placed along the top from B1 to F1. So we got 5 cells representing the 5 letters. So let's look at this, how we can do this. Well, once we've got the letter guess and the position, let's just put these two together. When we get to the if, we only want it to do this if it finds a letter. So I'm going to replace this message box here with the following command: range B1, that's where we're starting, dot cells, and we want in the cells row 1, so the row index is always going to be in row 1, comma, but then the column is going to change as it goes, so we want the letter position. So letter position in here, close the bracket, and that equals, so that particular cell equals U case. Now that's a command to turn everything to uppercase, open bracket, and we just want the letter guess. Remember, that's the variable that holds the guessed letter. So if we look at this, we've already come across on the course range and the cells command. What we're using this for is together, because if we don't specify a starting point, then the cells command will always assume that row 1 and column 1 would equate to cell A1, the top left corner of the sheet. But if you want 1, 1 in cells to represent a particular start point and begin from that point, then we can specify. So we're specifying that cell B1 is cells 1, 1, row 1, column 1. I hope that makes sense. So that puts the correct letter in capitals along the top of our sheet on there. Now, what we do need to do is every time the game ends and then they start a new game, we need any letters that were left up the top here to be cleared. So what we can do before anything in our routine is that we can type in a command to clear that range. So we can say range, and we'll say B1 to F1 dot clear contents. Now remember, we could use just the word clear or clear contents. They will clear that. One of them will determine, for example, clear contents will clear the data only. If we use the word clear, then it will clear not only the data but the formatting as well, which we don't want, because later on we'll have some formatting on there for the font size and bold, etc. Now, before we even run this, and I hope you haven't hit the F5 key, because you will get into what we call a loop of infinity, and that's because when you use the do loop, do until counter equals 5, Well, at the moment, counter will be 0. Whenever you declare a variable and the program runs, it's going to start the counter at 0. Now when it gets to here and does the loop, when it comes back round, there's nothing in this code loop that tells it to count up the counter. So this will just continue to loop around. So we need to include a counter in there. So that's quite simple. What we'll do is once they've guessed the letter here, we'll add counter equals counter plus 1. Now it will only add 1 to the counter if they get the letter right. Otherwise it'll just keep going round and round, which is what we want, because if they have to go through the whole alphabet, 26 letters, then so be it. But of course doing that, they're bound to discover the word. And every time they get a letter correct, it will count up. And remember, it will stop looping once it knows they've guessed 5 characters. So now we've got this, we can test it. So let's test the gameplay now. So we'll hit the F5. It's picked a word. Let's put a letter in. Let's put the letter E, because we know that's there. If we enter that, you can see on the sheet it's now put the letter E in the second cell along. So we know the letter E is the second one along. So looking at my list, it can be either lemon, melon or peach. So maybe if we try the letter M. Right, okay, it's telling us that it's peach. That's because we've still got the message box to tell us that it didn't find the letter, but at least we know what the word is while we're testing on that. Now we can see that we can put in other letters. Now again, if I deliberately put in a wrong letter, X, we know it doesn't count up, so I'm going to get more than 5 loops. If I put in the correct letter, P, it puts that in, A, C, H, and the game ends. It stopped when it knew I'd completed the word. So here we've got a game in play, and so far it's working. So now we get to the interesting part of when we get it wrong, instead of seeing that message box down the bottom here, we want it to be able to add a picture to start to build up our Hangman image. Now, so we're going to replace this line with some more code. Now, the code that we're going to write may seem a little bit daunting to begin with, because there's a lot going on. We now need to keep a track of when they get a letter wrong. So we're going to use another counter variable, but we'll call it dim wrong counter as integer. So the next part is altering the if statement, because we got a couple of things to do here as well as adding the image. When it detects a letter, remember our loop will go round 5 times. Now the problem with that, watch what happens if I run this routine. I put the letter E in, which we know it's going to find, and it puts it in position right at the end, so I'm guessing it's going to be grape or prune. But if I put another E in, and another, and another, and another, you'll see it's now stopped running, because it allowed me to put the same letter in more than once. And every time it picks up the correct letter, because it doesn't know I've already used that letter before, it still counts up this counter here. until it gets to 5 and then stops the loop because it assumes I've used 5 letters that were all correct. So to detect that, we're going to add a line just above this here, and it's going to be another if, but it's going to be an if on a single line. So we're going to say if the cells, the row is going to be row 1, comma, the column is going to be the letter position variable plus 1 equals nothing at all. So if that position is empty, then counter equals counter plus 1. So we're going to move this counter from down here, so we can delete this one down here, so it will only count if that letter they put in is in an empty space. Okay, so with this particular situation on the letter E, the first time I put that in, it would have added 1 to the counter, looped round. If I'd put another letter E in, it would check that position, in our case the 5th position, and it will realise that it's not empty, so it will not add 1 to the counter, and it'll go down and just loop continuously, so we can't reuse the same letter. So that cures that problem. Now we get on to the fun part of putting in an image when we get a wrong letter. So we can delete this message box down here under the else. Now the first thing we're going to do is to add up the counter, because we need to know how many wrong guesses, because we're going to use that number on the image. Remember all of our image files that we spoke about at the start of this exercise, that they have a number at the end: image 1, image 2, image 3. This variable is what's going to increase that number. So we can say wrong counter equals wrong counter plus 1. So now we need to insert an image, and we're going to use the with command on here. With in the 2-day course, as you know, the with command allows us to avoid repetition of a long line of code. So we're going to say with. Now the command we want is active sheet, so the sheet that we're on, the active sheet, dot pictures dot, and what do we want to do with that object of pictures? We want to insert, so we use the insert. If we're going to delete, we would use the word delete, but here we want to insert a picture into the active sheet. Now insert has an attribute of the path of where you're going to get your images from. So what we need to do is do open bracket, and then in speech marks we write the path. Now as you remember, I kept mine simple, the path. If you've got a path that's on your desktop, that will be quite a long one. Remember, you can find the path quite easily by going into your Explorer and find where the images are. As you can see, I've drilled down to the folder called Hangman, And then if you've got this path bar at the top here, it currently says this PC local disk Hangman. But if I click in here, you'll see it gives me the proper written path, C:\Hangman. So if you do that on yours, if you've got your images located elsewhere, you might have a much longer path statement. So at this point you can just do Control-C to copy that. We can then go back to our code, and I can then just Control-V to paste the path in where it'll find the images. We'll then do the backslash and then the name of the file. Well, we know that all of our files are called image, but then what we want is to close speech mark. We're then going to use the ampersand to concatenate to join onto the end of that the wrong counter number, so that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then joining onto that we need speech mark, full stop, and JPEG. Speech mark, close bracket. So hopefully that makes sense. We're inserting a picture into the active sheet. That's where it'll locate the file called image, and what we're doing here is we're adding onto the end of the word image a number, and then adding onto the end of the number .jpeg. So in other words, it's the whole file name that we've got. If we enter that, that is the line that we don't want to have to repeat, because one of the attributes, or the method or action as some people call it, of that insert pictures line is the position of the picture, which is what we're going to do now, because we can now say dot left. Now remember, dot left would be tagged onto the end normally of our image file, so that is telling us the left edge of that image is going to equal active sheet dot range, and then we can specify which cell we want this in, and we're going to put it in C5 dot left. So in other words, the left edge of the image is going to butt up against the left edge of cell C5. We also want to do the same for the top of the image, so dot top equals active sheet dot range C5 dot top. And because we've got this in a with statement, we do end with. So just as a reminder here, for those of you that didn't attend or can't remember what we did on the 2-day course when we spoke about this, having the with here avoids us having to type this whole line in front of dot left and dot top. So the common factor only needs to be written once, and then we can put the methods and the attributes on individual lines. So we've now got the image in the correct position there. Once we've done the end with, we want to refresh the sheet. What happens is, if I just run this command here to insert an image, we won't actually see it, because the actual sheet needs to refresh, and the way we do that is to select a cell which causes it to refresh. So we just need to put a command in that selects a cell. So I'm just going to put in range A1 dot select. So we're selecting A1 purely to refresh the sheet so the image is updated. Now remember, everything we're doing here is still in this loop, and what we want here is to say that if the wrong counter equals 10, then there's no point in you carrying on looping, because we've only got 10 images that draws the hangman. So once we've got to 10, it may as well jump out of the loop. So we can do that by saying if wrong counter equals 10, then exit do. So exit the do loop. Okay, so exit do. Now we can put after the loop, before the end sub, a quick message box just to say game over. Now there's one final thing we need to go back to, then we can test this. When you put images on a sheet, we need to clear them at the start of the next game. So if we come all the way to the top, remember this line here where we cleared the contents of the letters in the first row. Under that, let's put a similar line which says active sheet dot pictures dot delete. So any pictures on the active sheet, delete them. So we're going to clear that out for the new game. Now we can test this to see if it works and if we have to debug. Now when you test this, if you get the debug box come up, always click on the debug word, because it will hopefully give you an indication by highlighting in yellow where it thinks the issue is. Now if you do come across any errors, it's more likely to be a spelling mistake in one of the variables or the commands, or it could be that you've missed out a speech mark somewhere, or a comma, or a full stop, or it could be that, like down here, you've forgotten to end a block, end with, or end if. And finally, a common error is when people put lines of code in the wrong position. By me even putting this counter here, this if wrong counter outside of the loop, would cause issues. So make sure everything is in the right order. So let's try our game. So if we F5 to run it, it asks for a letter. Let's pick a letter. I'm going to pick the letter E because I know it has a letter E in, and it's put that in position. It's the second one along. We can then hit maybe M. Right, I know the word is melon on there, but let's deliberately put in some wrong guesses. X. It starts to bring the pictures in. So X, let's do a Z. Let's do the letter B. So I'm deliberately typing in letters that I know aren't there, and if I carry on going, it's going to count up that wrong counter to 10 and then stop and end the game. So as we go through, let's deliberately get it wrong. So Y, let's do a P, so R, W, Q, V, and let's do K. Now game over, it's finished drawing the hangman on there, so I can click OK. The game is over and it stops at that point. So once we've done all of that, we can now start to tidy up the sheet, and we can also add some more words down here. Now as you can see, the program actually works. we may want to do a couple of things up here. For example, select these letters here and increase the font size to make it nice and big. We might also want to make them bold and center so they stand out. We may also want to add some more letters here, maybe mango and pecan and other fruits, vegetables, or whatever you want to put in on this list. And we could then hide this column. So what we're going to do next is we've named the sheet that the game is played on, sheet 1, we've called it Hangman Game, and we also want to save the file. So if you click on the save button, give it a name, we'll call it game exercise, and I'm going to store it on my desktop. And remember, we may want to change the extension. It's got to be saved as a macro enabled. Okay, that's important to change that. If you can't change it here, if you're on a different version, then just click on more options, but you can click here. Remember, it's not an Excel workbook, it's an Excel macro enabled workbook that you want to save this file as, and we'll save this. So now that we've saved this file, what we'll do is we'll add a new sheet, and this can be the start sheet. And we can move that in front, and now we want to put a picture on here that can act as a button to play the game. So if we go to Insert, Illustrations, Pictures, Place Over Cells, this device, and in the Hangman folder you will see that there is a picture called Splash, which will be a splash screen. We just resize that, and we can move that somewhere on here, and we can use this as a button. So if we right click, we can assign a macro, the Hangman Game, click OK, away from that, and we can even give them instructions by merging these cells, making it bigger and bold, and we can just say click Hangman to play. And there it is there. And if we get rid of the grid lines on here as well, get rid of that. Now that will play the game. So when they click this, let's see what happens. When I click that, it actually stays on this sheet. So if I click cancel, now we've got a problem with this in the fact that as I click cancel, I've got to go through all of it. So we're going to do two things. First of all, if we bring the code window up, the first thing I want it to do when it plays is I always want it to go to the Hangman Game sheet. So that would be the first thing. So we'll say sheets, and that'll be Hangman Game, making sure I spell this correctly, and we can choose select, so it actually selects that. You could have activate, but we'd choose select. So we know when this runs, it always begins on the other sheet. Okay, so that moves that. The next thing we want to do is this thing of if the input box is displayed and they change their mind and they click cancel without entering a letter in, we don't want it to have to go 10 times through the loop before it ends the game. So after the letter guess input box line, that's this one here, we'll add a line after that that says if letter guess variable equals a null value, nothing at all, that's 2 speech marks, then exit sub. In other words, just end the subroutine at that point. Now we can use the speech marks for a null value because of course our letter guess variable is set as a string data type. Okay, so with that done, let's try this again, and going back to here, we've got to add everything again. So just to keep it simple, what we'll do is we'll recreate this sheet again because we've got rid of the picture. Okay, so let's just delete this, add a new one, call it start. Let's add the picture. Quickly add in this, resize it, move it into position, right click, assign macro, Hangman Game, click OK. Let's just do some more of the merging, make it bigger and bolder, and click Hangman to play. And finally get rid of the grid lines, and we're done. So with this we can now play this. It goes here. If I cancel that, we can go back to start and play again. Okay, so let's just try this. So I do the letter E, M, P, A. If I do a couple of deliberate wrong letters, so game over. So that's as far as we've got. Now that's the end of this exercise, but I hope it gives you an insight about building up a routine in stages rather than trying to do the whole thing. Hopefully there's been a few commands there that have been a refresh or reminded you of what we did on the 2-day course. The other thing about this is, as a developer, we could improve this. Maybe you want to think about having a different list of words and then have an option, so at the start of the game they get to choose a subject, maybe history or names of fruits, names of pop stars or songs and things like that. So you give them different categories to aim for. So think how you would do that to reference maybe different columns of data when they start the game. You could also have a more glorified box at the end, instead of just saying game over, to say you won, and maybe even using the counter to count how many tries they took to get the word correct, adding a couple of variable counters together. Also, words that have duplicate letters in. Now on one of the courses we do look at that, and if you do want to see how to achieve multiple letter checking, then again you can always message us via YouTube. Hope you enjoyed that and that you continue learning the coding, and it's a fun thing to do. We were doing it with a game, but remember this would be the same if you was doing a work project using important databases, importing, exporting, emailing. All of that uses the same structure. Start off in a small way and then build upon it to get exactly what you want.